Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I'm excited you're joining us for our second show. I'd like to welcome you to our new live talk show. It's called Downright Capable, Changing the Way Others View Down Syndrome. This is our second show, and if you haven't seen our first show, we will be sharing that with you as well. We are very excited to share that it has had over 1,400 views. So we know that the information that we're sharing is getting out there, and hopefully you're being positively impacted by it. My name is Brian Herndon, and I'm a dad to a 10-year-old boy with Down syndrome. I've been an educator for over 20 years, and I'm now an education professor with a passion for supporting families of children with special needs. My co-host is Marla Marasco. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Marla.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Marla Marasco. I am an award-winning Down syndrome advocate, a speaker, an author, and a mom to an awesome 12-year-old boy. And I'm excited to be collaborating here with Brian to help change the mindset of the way people view Down syndrome.
Absolutely. That's our goal. Thank you, Marla. Today's show, we're going to be talking about something very near and dear to our hearts, something that we have titled, Don't View Our Kids Through a Deficit-Based Lens. And today's topics, we're going to be covering what a deficit-based approach is, reframing their thinking, strengths-based versus deficit-based pyramids, and tips to help you collaborate with your team.
Great. Thank you, Brian. So this is actually going to be a very exciting show. And I just wanted to take a minute to welcome our replay viewers. If you are watching on the replay, please know that you can still comment and you can still share the show after it is over. And I just wanted to say, please stay with us until the end of the show because we have some really exciting resources that we want to share with you. So if all of you are ready, Brian, let's get started. Can you share with our viewers what is a deficit-based approach?
Absolutely. Thanks, Marla. So the term deficit, when you think about it, it's defined as the amount by which something is too small. So in sports, it might be the amount or score by which a team or an individual is losing. And it can also be defined as a deficiency or a failing, especially in a neurological or psychological function. So if we think about IEPs and people with disabilities as having deficits, we might think of them as not being enough, as losing or failing in some way. I know, Marla, that you and I both do not think of our boys as not being enough or as being losers or failures.
No,
We're very proud of our boys.
We are, very much so.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to make sure is that, when thinking about a deficit-based lens, I want to make sure that my son's IEP team, and I know, Marla, you do as well, that they don't think of him in those terms. Yet when we focus heavily on what our sons cannot do, the message that's sent, whether we realize it or not, is that they are failures or they are losers or they're not enough.
Right.
And when we focus heavily on what our children cannot do, we develop what's called a deficit-based lens. Mm-hmm. When we use that lens, we tend to see people that way. We see them as a deficit. So it's our hope that after today's program that we can help everyone who's watching feel like they can have a voice and say, let's start to view our children not with a deficit-based lens, but with a strengths-based lens.
That is absolutely correct. And thank you, Brian. So basically what we're going to be talking about now is reframing the way the school is thinking. So schools and teachers have focused so long on what our children can't do that it's hard for them to view our children any differently. So when the deficit is the starting point of what our children can't do, then basically the expectations are going to be lowered. It's basically like a pyramid. So Brian, do you want to share with them what we're talking about?
Absolutely. And I love this example. It might be hard to see, but when you think of a pyramid, you think of the base being wide at the bottom and at the top being narrow. And when we look at students through a deficit-based lens, we spend the most amount of time focusing on when we look at them through a deficit-based lens, we spend most of our time focused on the bottom of the pyramid. and their disability and what they can't do. And then essentially the school is not aware of their strengths, which is the top of the pyramid. Well, no, sorry. I'm flipping this around. When we think about, I'm doing this all wrong, sorry. When we think about a deficit-based lens, we spend the most time up here focused on the disability, right, and not on their strengths. And the school is not aware of their strengths because we don't spend any time on it. We spend all of our time on the things that the kids cannot do. And what that does is it lends itself to not look, or to kind of violating that idea of the least dangerous assumption. When we assume that the deficit drives who they are, then we are in fact making the most dangerous assumption and possibly damaging our children. And I believe that it leads to towards segregation and isolation of our kids. Because when we have that deficit-based lens, we're going to want to keep our kids, isolated and separated so that we think that we can meet their needs better.
Right.
But what if we were to flip that pyramid on its head, Marla, and think of it differently? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I have my pyramid. Oops, which way are we going? Which, again, is the strength-based lens. So we're flipping that pyramid around, and we're making the top part the strengths so that the teachers can actually focus on what our children can do, because any small success is a building block to learning and a building block to empowerment. So when educators are working from a strength-based lens, programs emerge that are centered around the child, they're respectful, and they're empowering. So what we're saying, again, is that the school needs to basically focus right in this area on the strengths of our children. So when they spend their time and their effort, what they need to do is they need to identify your children's strengths, but they also need to then identify their weaknesses and find what meaningful resources and supports are available so that they can then develop strength-based SMART IEP goals that will enable your child to develop skills, gain the knowledge that they need, and more importantly, have access to the grade level curriculum and allow them to learn and work with their own unique way. So Brian, I think that you are going to be sharing with us some tips on how we can do that.
Absolutely. So if you think about your child's IEP and their team, and you want to focus on a strengths-based approach, you might ask the school to do a strengths assessment. Obviously as parents, Marla, I know you do this and I do this as well, that we share the things that we think that our kids are good at. And in that IEP process, in the parent section, we comment and talk about the things that our kids are good at. But then what happens is we kind of move on from that and ignore it. But if we want to use those strengths to improve and help our children create or help develop goals that move our children forward and maybe be more included in the general education classroom, we can look at a strengths-based assessment.
Right.
The other thing is creating SMART goals off of your child's strengths. So if you haven't heard of a SMART goal, basically it's an acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-bound. So that is a SMART goal. So you might have some examples of a SMART goal. For example, you might have a student. Here's just an example. It says, by May 15th, Elena will know from memory all products of two one-digit numbers with 90% accuracy in four out of 5 tries. That happens all the time. That's probably pretty common for an IEP goal. But what if we turn that again on its head, like we did with the pyramid there, and we said, Elena will use her skills with a times table to help transition by May 15th to knowing from memory all products of two one-digit numbers with 90% accuracy in 4 out of 5 tries. That really kind of focuses on her strengths and her skills rather than from what she doesn't know. We're still working toward the same thing.
Correct, right.
Here's just another quick example. Sam will learn the class vocabulary words with 90% accuracy in 3 out of 4 tries or weekly opportunities. Of course, we want Sam to know the class vocabulary.
Right.
But what if we, yeah, we like to know that. But what if we flip it on its head and we say Sam will use his creativity and his interpersonal skills to develop and lead his peers in a class vocabulary game with 90% accuracy in 3 out of 4 weekly opportunities. So Sam's obviously a pretty personable kid,
right,
and he could use that strength to develop his vocabulary skills.
Right.
So Marla, it's really just about how can we take that same thing, like you talked about. We do need to look at the deficit. We need to look at why our children need an IEP. That's why they need an IEP. But let's flip it around and change the way we think and create goals that actually build off of their strengths rather than emphasize their deficits.
Right, right. And, I totally agree with you, Brian, because, when we started talking about this topic, and I was doing some research and, I found some of those examples that you just shared. I mean, it actually got me thinking because, to your point, Sam will use his creativity and interpersonal skills to develop and lead his peers in a class vocabulary game. That actually sounds kind of fun.
Right, it does. Absolutely.
And it's something that, it got me thinking about my son and thinking, that's actually, he can do that. That's a pretty cool goal. And, right now in 6th grade, the vocabulary is just incredible that these kids have to know. And he's, they're hard. I'm looking at these words going, oh my gosh, so, using the creativity and using our child's strengths to create a goal that is attainable and measurable. I think that's really what's key. And, like I said, it got me thinking about my son's IEP goals. And I went back and looked at his IEP and I'm like, oh my gosh, here I am talking about this on today's show. And he does not have any strength-based SMART IEP goals. So guess what? Put the fire under my butt that I'm walking in with these examples and walking in, with this pyramid and just saying, we need to reframe our thinking. We need to utilize his strengths and his abilities and make him successful in the classroom, the general education classroom, and make it meaningful to him, so that he's still a part of the conversation and still learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as you said that, I was thinking about my son, Nate, and his goals as well. And when we think about, when last year, his math goal, they wanted him to learn his math facts. And honestly, I didn't care if he learned his math facts because I knew he'd eventually have a calculator. Right. And so I wanted to look at him from a strengths-based perspective. Well, let's take what he could do, because I had actually homeschooled him in 2nd grade. Right. And so I said, what if we take the number line and the hundreds chart and some manipulatives, and that he will learn to use those things, or he will use those things to then understand the mathematical functions. So we took what he was good at, and we made a goal to help him learn those mathematical functions. And then once he understood that, we could transition to a calculator. So he didn't think it was just some magical button that he hit when he hit the X or the minus sign.
How he got there.
Right. And so he's beginning to understand that. So we shifted our thinking from this negative deficit-based lens of what he could not do to, hey, he is good at this. Let's build off of that.
Right. And that's actually a good point, because and I know you and I talked about this, taking the things that excite them and what interests them. So, my son loves Notre Dame. Yes. And when, we're season ticket holders, and when we got our tickets in this nice, pretty little box that Notre Dame sent us, there was like the schedule. it was the Notre Dame schedule, and it said Notre Dame and then opponent, and then you actually filled it in. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, how cool would this be to send this to school? Now, we're 3 games in, and I just thought about this like yesterday because, again, this is the topic we're talking about. And I thought to myself, how cool would this be? So I'll send this into the school. Jacob will have to use technology, because that's a big thing right now for him, use technology to find out what the last 3 scores were, all right, and then fill them in the respective columns.
Absolutely.
And then figuring out, basically, I guess, who won, because what number is larger than the other. And oh my gosh, that was a way to tie in something that he enjoys, something he watched, learning about the use of technology, and learning a math, like you said, a math problem, which number is bigger. And, I know that that's not something that's accessible to them at the school, the Notre Dame schedule. But if we did a little pre-planning and we looked at our child's strengths. Now, in our last show, we talked about the All About Me page. And that was something that I said, this is his interests: Notre Dame, music, football, basketball. So I'm hoping that I'm getting them, again, to reframe the way they're thinking about educating him and using those interests, those strengths, and helping him to, again, access technology, to learn how to do that, to start figuring out, what number is greater than the other one. That is one of his goals. But, just making it fun. Making it relatable to them and what they enjoy.
Absolutely. And Marla, I know, like you said, your family is big Notre Dame fans, and how much more exciting would math be if we could do math looking at football, right? And how much more exciting for your son could it be if we were to look at football, things that interest him, rather than just learning math for math's sake. He learns math because there's a purpose behind it.
Right.
And so, Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, going back to what we talked about, so when I went back to my son's IEP, we're talking about this deficit-based lens, because, again, what I had said is that's what the school knows. That's all they know, is that's their way of teaching the school to look at the child from a deficit-based and then figuring out what he needs.
Right.
So I went and I looked at it, and the first sentence was, because of his disability, he will be unable to access the curriculum. And I thought to myself, well, we're just starting off great, aren't we?
Right. Well, and that sets the stage for he never gets to.
And the lower expectations,
Right. And if you think back to this pyramid, when we flip it upside down, if we look here, we do have to look at that disability. The federal law says, look at the disability. We do have to look at where he should be versus where he is. But then let's spend all of our time looking at what he's good at, and then taking this information and putting it in up here so that he can get there. And that's what it's all about, just turning it on its head, because like you said, Marla, when we go from here, in a lot of schools, and they're doing the best they can, the best that they know. And a lot of the testing is a deficit-based testing. They tend to, okay, here's the strengths, here's what he doesn't know, and here's all the things that, we need to get to before he can be included. And that's just not the case.
Right. I don't mean to interrupt you, Brian, but it's like, we start, the other thing that we want to share with you and empower you is that, when you start hearing words like, they will be a distraction, we have no support, we don't have time, we don't have money, we don't know how to teach them, they can't do mentality, you need to stop it right there and basically say, well, let's focus on what they can do. And it's really, like Brian said, flip it on its head. Stop that negative perception of your child, because like I said, then the expectations are lowered. So when you start hearing that stuff, reverse it, put it in a positive way. And go ahead, Brian, I know what you were going to show.
No, I was just I was thinking, to kind of go off of that, I know, Marla, we're going to put this, as a resource up, but it's a strength. It's hard for me to say, strengths-based IEP fact sheet. And some of the things it talks about a strengths-based IEP, it's an approach that leverages a student's abilities to help work on those weaknesses. Right. It's a way to combine standards-based IEPs, which is important, with a growth mindset that helps students believe they can improve their abilities. And it's a process that can lead to more self-awareness and self-advocacy. What it's not is a superficial look at strengths. And I think sometimes those IEP meetings, they kind of end up doing that. Right. It's not an adult-only process. Right. Students are encouraged to identify their strengths and actively participate. Again, we have to keep in mind the age of the child. Right. Your son, Jacob, is probably at an age that he can start participating. Exactly. And my son has participated a little bit as well. And I think I talked about that at the last show. Right. It's not just about strengths and weaknesses. It also focuses on interests and preferences. And so there's a lot of great information there to help people think about a strengths-based IEP and what it is and what it's not. And I think that, hopefully, parents and if there's any teachers out there watching, that when you see this, you can start to change your thinking about how you see kids with Down syndrome and how they might be able to do things that maybe you didn't think they could if we tap into those things that are of interest to them and that are strengths for them.
Right. And that actually goes back to even our first show was, getting to know the child. Does that child like to work in a small group, or do they like to work independently? Do they like to use the calculator, or, just figuring out and then figuring out what available resources that they have, or supports that you have. Because, when you hear we don't have time or we don't have the resources, to me, that's unacceptable. Right. This is an individual education plan. This is what's going to help this child be successful in the school system. And we need to figure out how to provide them that support.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, maybe we're a broken record here, but when you look at their strengths, I think it really begins to shift your mind as a teacher. I know it shifts my mind, as a parent, and I've been an educator as well, to think, hey, I've got kids in the class that really enjoy football or soccer, or they enjoy, dance, or they enjoy different things. And it really helps me to go, what, when I'm going to do a lesson or when I'm going to do an activity, I can do an activity maybe a little differently than I've done it in the past, so that I'm tapping into those things that the students in my class are good at doing. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's important for us to think about.
Right. Brian, so I am going to pop up this question from Chelsea Clark. Do you have recommendations about especially helpful assessments? I don't personally have any recommendations. Brian, I didn't know if you knew of anything. I do know that where we found this fact sheet was on the website understood.org. So, they may have a list of skill assessments there. Brian, but I don't know if you know of any that we can share as well.
Marla, I'm glad you popped that question up. Chelsea, if you're still listening, excuse me. There are some assessments out there. I'm not real good on knowing assessments, so I'll be real honest with you. It's not my area of strength, but I will do some research on that, and I will make sure that we put a link to some ideas there. I think that it's important for you as parents, first of all, to make sure your voice is heard. You know your child better than anybody. And so do they like learning in small groups or big groups? Do they enjoy being around people? Do they thrive when they're in a language-rich environment? Mm-hmm. Are they sports, oriented? Are they physically oriented? Do they have good verbal skills? Are they nonverbal? Are they semi-verbal? I think those are all things that you as parents need to make sure you are putting out there.
Right.
And sharing with the team so that the team knows what your child is good at doing. From there, there are some standardized, or I don't know if they're standardized, but there are some assessments out there that we can help tap into. I know I've done some of those personality assessments, things like that. Obviously, those are for older people, but I know that there's going to be some resources out there, and I'll make sure to do some research and get that to you. So thank you, Chelsea, for that question.
Thank you, Brian. And the other thing that I wanted to share with all of you as well, because again, this goes towards the IEP. And, when I did look at my son's IEP, I did realize that there really isn't measurable benchmarks, and I think that needs to be clearly defined because for my son, they're not. I think that is not helpful because how do we know if they're growing? How do we know if they're learning unless we wait till the end of the IEP to figure out it didn't work? So, make sure that you're looking at your child's IEP and seeing if there's very measurable, clear benchmarks that, again, is going to help you know if your child is making that effective progress. That needs to be spelled out in the IEP.
Absolutely. And so parents and teachers alike, teachers, you probably know this, but parents, excuse me, when you get those reporting, or when you get your child's IEP report card, I guess you can say, you should have the information that matches the benchmarks along the way. So if a child needs to do it 90% of the time in order to meet their goal, then throughout the year, the first assessment period, they might do it 40% of the time, and the next it would be 60%. So there's some benchmarks along the way so that then you can see they're making progress. Because I will tell you that a lot of times changes of placement happen because kids are not making progress because it's not the least restrictive environment for them, which is then where we get our feathers a little ruffled because our kids aren't included. But if your child is making progress toward their goals in the current placement, then that is the right placement for your child. And that's an important concept to remember. So in school districts, if you're wanting to change placements and a child's making progress toward that goal, toward his or her goals, it's real hard to justify that. So parents, I hope you understand that process. And it's important for you as parents to keep note of that so that you know what's going on, so that if anything does change, that you can be a voice. You are an equal voice on the IEP team.
Right. Great. Yeah. And thank you, Brian. So we are actually getting to the end of our half hour with you. And I just wanted to let all of you know who are watching that we are accepting guests to our show. As well as if you are interested in sponsoring our show, you can contact us at downrightcapable@gmail.com, and I will put that on the screen. But again, Brian, thank you for a great conversation. I think we had a really helpful topic here today.
I do too, Marla. This is, you and I are very passionate people, and we love what we do, and we want to get the word out to other parents. We want to empower parents to feel like they can have a voice and be a voice for their children. And I'm so glad that all of you joined us today. And those of you who are watching this on replay, thank you. I hope this is informative and helpful to you. That's our goal. We hope you enjoy listening and to this topic as much as we enjoy sharing it with you. If there is a topic that you would like us to discuss, you can email us at downrightcapable@gmail.com. You can send us a message through Facebook on Messenger on our Facebook page. Is it Downright Capable Show? Is that right, Marla?
Yes.
Okay, you can send us a message. Let us know. We want to know what you want to hear. Obviously we're passionate and we're going to present things that we want to share, but we want to make this helpful to you as well. So we'll share the resources, all the things that we've shared with you today. We'll have those posted And we plan to do another show in October. Is that right, Marla?
That is correct, yes. So please stay tuned. If you haven't checked the notifications on our Facebook page, make sure you do that so you can stay up to date. And we do have an email list, which is in one of the comments on the Facebook page. So make sure to sign up for the email list. So again, you can stay up to date on our future shows and any new things that we have coming up. So again, thank you all again for being here. We appreciate you taking the time, and we'll look forward to seeing you in October. Have a good day. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye, Marla. Have a good weekend.
Take care. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.